following program is presented by the Jericho Network in association with Podcast One.
There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers. A dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends. A place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view. But when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Welcome. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me this evening, Tim Dennis. We're going to welcome Dark Waters back to our show tomorrow. It's his first time on Beyond the Darkness. Many of you have asked for his return. He has some chilling new stories from incubus to dogmen. You're going to want to make sure you tune in for that tomorrow on Beyond the Darkness. Tonight, though, Tim, we're going to take a look at something that seems to be just equally fascinating to our listeners, is the idea of these more dark and, I don't want to say violent, but definitely more aggressive encounters with Bigfoot. Andre Verge is our guest this evening. He's written the book Nightmare in the Woods, One Family's Strange and Terrifying Encounter with Bigfoot in the Northeastern United States. Mr. Verge was originally born on a dairy farm in Westfield, Vermont, and he currently resides in eastern Pennsylvania. He's the founder of Tego Tea Company, a Native American tea that is currently being examined to reduce the effects of diabetes. He's passionate about his native ancestral heritage and continues to enjoy a rich, fulfilled life in the outdoors with his family and friends. He's here to share his very strange encounters that took place back in the summer of 1976. Without further ado, let's welcome to Beyond the Darkness, Andre Verge. Andre, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm doing well. We've heard so many stories over the years of this kind of benevolent creature, this Bigfoot creature that is often seen. Many consider it just an outdoors guardian, but there are more families than not and more people coming forward that seem to have had very different encounters, and that this beast is not so benevolent but more malevolent. How old were you when this interaction started with your family?
Actually, I was 8 years old in 1976.
And had your family ever dealt with anything like this before, strange encounters with creatures or ghosts or anything that would, make you predisposed to have these type of encounters?
No, actually, this was our first encounter with anything like this. It kind of rattled us to the core when it happened.
All right, so you were about 8 years old, summer of 1976. So that's right, I was about 10 at that point, and just starting to get into the In Search Of and the Bigfoot shows and all of that going on. Talk to me about where this took place.
Actually, it took place in Morris County, New Jersey. Excuse me. It all kind of started suddenly, and it lasted for, I'm going to say probably close to a month, where we kept having encounters and sightings around our home.
Now, when you think Bigfoot, I think you're with me on this. Most people think of the wooded areas of Washington or maybe Upper Peninsula, Michigan, Minnesota, things like that. When you say this took place where for you? In New Jersey?
In New Jersey, yes.
In New Jersey. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have always thought of Bigfoot being, like you said, the Northwest and up in California and Oregon and such.
Right.
And after I started doing more research on it later on, I discovered that the majority of the sightings are seen in New York and especially around Port Jervis area.
Okay, so where was this taking place? Were you, was this like a family cabin? Was this near your home? What was the scenario?
Actually, this was our home. It was in a partially wooded area, but it was also in a developed area. And the only thing that separated us from most of the development was a land tract that had the power lines spanning through them. So we had a large section of woods behind our home.
Oh, okay.
And it just kept coming after us. I mean, for a while, almost like on a nightly basis, we kept having encounters.
Well, tell me about the first encounter. What happened to you and your family that first time?
Well, we were just driving home. We had a 68 Ford Fairlane car, and we were tooling up the driveway, and as we went up the driveway, it was dark. We were coming home from dinner. My mother observed some bright yellow eyes on top of the hill overlooking our home. And we just kind of laughed it off. It could have been a deer or something like that. But she insisted, and the next morning when we were walking around up next to the wood's edge, we started finding tracks everywhere. And it just kind of blew up from there. We just kept seeing everything from tracks to we would start smelling it in the area. And then eventually we started having sightings just about every night.
Well, now when you say you would smell it, can you describe what that was like?
Yeah, it's absolutely horrible. It smells, I would relate it to almost a sulfuric and almost like a dead animal corpse on the road in the summertime. It's a very putrid smell, and it would overpower everything around the area.
And this just all of a sudden popped up out of nowhere. You'd never had experiences with this before. There had never been these kind of scents that would show up once in a while. This was just a brand new experience.
Yeah, totally new for us. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know where to turn. And it got to the point where our animals would start sensing it, and we knew when it was around. And it was pretty much toying with us. It was making itself known to us all the time. For anything from sneaking around the house outside at night to throwing rocks at us in our garden.
Now, were there other houses close by? Was anybody else in the neighborhood having an effect by this creature?
Well, that's the thing. When this started happening, we were all pretty much sworn to secrecy because we didn't want people to think we were crazy.
Right.
This is something that doesn't happen. So we never really discussed it with anybody else in the neighborhood, and we didn't hear anything from them either. But after I wrote the book, I've been getting phone calls and emails and texts from people that are relating their same story that happened to them, and they're coming out with it now.
Wow,
and
very
it's been
interesting.
It's been an absolute floodgate of people contacting me, and the book's only been out for 3 weeks, and it's been going wild. It really has.
All right. If you guys feel that there's something stalking you and walking around your home, did it ever get to the point where your parents decided, we should call the police, at least in the beginning of this, before they realized that might be a Bigfoot that they were dealing with?
Well, that's something that we tried. We contacted the local police, excuse me, and they sent an unmarked car over along with a large Chevy Suburban. And I remember being in the home because the incident that really brought this whole thing out is the day that we saw the footprints outside, we started discovering them in our garden. And then we finally discovered them running around our yard. We had a hair sample hanging on part of an old fence. And then we had casted tracks everywhere. So we were making footprint impressions, but it was getting worse every day. So my father called the police. And like I said, the car showed up with a Suburban. We were instructed to stay in the house while they did their investigation. So we all watched from the windows. And we watched these three gentlemen. They cut down part of our fence. They took part of the shrubbery out along next to the wood's edge, and they took a whole bunch of casted prints. And then when everything was done, they smoothed out the entire surface so there was no sign of any tracks anymore. And they didn't know that we already had casted tracks ourselves because we had already taken them in home. But they gave us a card and said to call in a couple days with the result of the investigation. When we called up, the number was fictitious. And the police department didn't know what we were talking about.
Wait a minute. Well, then how did they intercept a call to the police department that ended up sending somebody else out to your property, do you think?
My opinion, I believe the police did know what was going on. They probably had other calls that had come in, but they were trying to keep it as quiet as possible. And I don't know who this other group that came out was. They went through our entire property. After everything was done, it was a little unnerving because we didn't know who these people were.
Right.
But they had all the evidence, or so they thought, but we still have casted prints ourselves. So we still kept some of the evidence, but they didn't know we had them. And we actually continue to keep that to today.
Did they, they've got this casted evidence that you guys have, but you kept that aside. When they were there, did you say, were they taking photographs, taking samples of casts and all of that as well?
Oh, yeah. Oh, they took about 10 casts themselves. They took photographs of the entire property, took part of the fence down that had a tuft of hair stuck to it, and also some bushes up by the woods. They cut down some of the bushes there and brought that with them. And went all through the woods behind our home. And the way the woods are set up, there's a power line to access road, maybe about a quarter of a mile in. And it led to an old burned-out bungalow community way off in the woods that had probably burned back in the 60s. And they went through everything. And then they just kind of up and left with us with a lot more questions than answers, to be honest with you.
Now, you had castings. That wasn't a very popular thing for the layman to know about or to consider to do back then. What was the inspiration to your family that, we should pour some plaster in this and actually cast these footprints and prove that what we're seeing is here? Well,
actually, our castings were pretty rudimentary, because what we did is we didn't have any plaster of Paris, and my brother had actually been working with such things in school, in art class. So we decided to use really sloppy cement to see how that would work out. It didn't make it as fine out as what we would like, but it did show the depth and size, which was amazing. It was 2.5 inches deep.
Wow! So this was a big boy. That's what you were up against.
Well, that's what really surprised me, because we thought this thing would have been huge, and it was a dry summer, so the ground was pretty hard packed. But the only thing that was odd is the way we noticed this, it was roughly about 6 to 6.5 feet high. So we couldn't figure out what was going on, but then we got another track in our garden that was 18 inches. And that one blew us away. So I in my opinion, what we were up against was possibly an adult and a juvenile together.
Were your parents keeping this from, an 8-year-old boy at that time, Andre, or were they letting you know what they thought you were up against?
Well, they let us know everything that was going on, because what our lifestyle in the 70s was, we had motorcycles and such, and we would go riding in the woods on trails. And the minute this started, it canceled off everything as far as going in the woods.
Right.
And of course, we had the backyard camping trips, with the tents with all the kids in the neighborhood. That was completely canceled out. Even things like I used to go fishing in a pond down the street, and we weren't allowed to go there anymore. And when nighttime came, everybody was pretty much in the home. We stayed really close to the house for 3 to 4 weeks. And we continuously kept watching the news to see what was going on, if anybody else had discovered anything. And we didn't see any more accounts anywhere, so we knew we were pretty much up against this alone. We had nobody to turn to. We had nobody we can talk to.
Right.
So we really relied on each other. And it was an interesting time in my life, because things like, for instance, my father became very vigilant with firearms in the home. And we had grown up with them, so we knew about them, but it was odd to see my father walking around outside with one.
Right, yeah. Suddenly you go from this kind of passive nature of just enjoying the woods in that area to suddenly you've got weapons and you need to start watching yourselves and protect yourselves.
Oh, yes.
Have you ever tried to file like a Freedom for Information Act from the local police department there to try to get records from those reports and see if those still exist anywhere?
No, my father had a friend that worked in the police department, and when he contacted him, there was no record that we'd even called. Everything was just pretty much whitewashed over.
Well, how did that call go? Did your father say, "Hey, I think we have a creature walking around our property, a Bigfoot," or did he just say, "I think there might be an intruder out there"?
Well, it started out with, we thought there was somebody playing a joke on us.
Mm-hmm.
So we started looking into the fact of maybe like catching somebody on film. So we'd set up a makeshift surveillance system in our home with a Polaroid camera and some floodlights. And it, unfortunately, the floodlights did not work because the dew had gotten into the light socket and shorted it out in the middle of the night. So we couldn't flip the lights on. We did hear more outside, but we couldn't get anything. There was no way to catch anything on film at that point.
What were the sounds that you guys were encountering?
Really, all that we were hearing primarily was breathing. We would hear large gasps of breath, and it was very quiet. That, and we would hear a rustling in the bushes. We would hear things being thrown. Things were thrown toward our home. We would hear noises. We had an old barn on our property, and we would hear noises behind the barn of things rustling through the metal areas that we had back there. We had some supplies back there. And it just continued to come around. And it continued until I literally came face to face with it 5 feet away.
Well, having weapons in the house now, and your dad is keenly aware of what's going on, when you would see the bush start moving or you would hear the breathing, did he ever take a shot to see if he could figure out what was out there?
Never took a shot. My father was an avid hunter, and he was a strong believer in if you don't see what you're shooting at, you don't pull the trigger.
Very good, yeah.
So he would never take a shot. We all knew where the weapons were in the house, and they were a stranger to us, but we were all pretty much made aware you don't touch them unless Dad's with you. So Dad was our protector and our defense in the home. Of course, that, and we also had a small Chinese pug in the house, too, that was also our protector.
Okay. Now, you said the animals would warn you. What would the dog or the other animals do that would set you off to realize there was something nearby?
Well, everything would be quiet. We'd be in the house watching television and whatnot, and all of a sudden the dog would just start barking. And she would run from corner to corner in the house as if there was something running around the house, and she was almost tracking it inside. So whenever she would start barking, we would jump up, grab flashlights, grab the weapons, check out the windows to see if there was anything close by. And being that it was summertime, we would have the windows open a lot, and then you'd start getting the smell. And that's when you knew there was something very close to the home.
So do you think there was something going on in your house with this creature as well? I mean, aside from it stalking you outside, why do you think the dog was acting as though it was tracking something in your home?
Well, what it was doing is whenever this thing would move outside, the dog would pretty much mimic it from the inside. It would be chasing it on the inside of the house as to where it was going, because it would hear its movement outside. So as the creature ran along one side of the house, the dog would run on the inside along that same section of the house, trying to find out where it was going, and pretty much alerting us to what was going on. So it was a pretty tense time in my life when I was growing up.
Yeah, it sounds like it. When you'd let your animals out, would there ever be any aggression towards the animals? Rocks thrown, growls, anything like that?
I had never seen anything. We used to let the dog out, and it was no problem, because we had woods around our house, so the dog would run out, do her business, and then come back in. After that, I noticed my father and my mother would only take the dog out on a leash and very close to the house.
Right.
It was pretty much a standoff. And do I think it would hurt us? I don't know. I mean, I've heard other accounts where things have happened to people, and so you really don't know. And, of course, as an 8-year-old boy, you have a definite imagination that starts making things grow in your mind as you're seeing things.
Right. Now, we talked about in the opening your native ancestral heritage. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your background?
Sure. I am a proud member of the Mulhegan Band of the Abenaki in northern Vermont. I'm a card-carrying native with 1/16% blood, recognized by the government, and we have a lot of ancestral beliefs, and of course, some of our beliefs do include Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or what's called a Wendigo, and they take it very seriously in my culture. I don't know if that has anything to do with what was going on. I kind of tend to believe it might have, because for some reason it just seeked out our family for a while. Do I think it was setting up a camp there? No, I think it was really just primarily passing through. But it liked being there for a while, and it really wanted to make itself known.
How does your Native American culture, how do the tribes in that area deal with or talk about Bigfoot? Do they believe that it is a creature? Do they believe it's just another type of man? What is their philosophy on all of this?
There's two takes on it. They believe that it is a guardian in the forest, and that it can be extremely aggressive and has been known to steal children and eat them. So anything to do with Wendigos, Bigfoots, they respect them, they know where the boundary line is, and they don't cross the boundary line. Now, Wendigo, that's a whole different aspect, because a Wendigo is supposedly able to make someone turn cannibalistic. So that's something that they don't even talk about. They won't even bring it up.
Really? Now, I've never heard that it turns people cannibalistic. How does it do that? Do you know what the story is?
It's supposedly a demon spirit that goes into your soul and forces you to become a cannibal.
Oh, so it's in the vein of Bigfoot, but it's more of like a disembodied Bigfoot that's more animalistic?
Yeah. It resembles a Bigfoot, but supposedly with like a deer head and a skull jaw. And it becomes very maniacal.
Did your family ever reach out to the Native American Society out there to see if they could get any answers on how to deal with this?
No, not at all, because like I said, when this started to happen, everybody pretty much clammed up. They didn't want anybody to know what was going on because they feared repercussion and embarrassment. So we were ordered not to say a word to anyone, of which I didn't for, my God, 42 years. And I've kept it inside all the time, and until finally I was told I have to get this out of my soul, so I wrote it down. And by luck, a publisher wanted to read what I had started to write, and he loved it, and he had it published, and now it's just going crazy.
As you were writing this, did more memories flood back to you, or do you just have it burned in your memory to begin with?
Oh, yeah. Oh, the memories just came flooding back. I started remembering certain little nuances, and we had also had another incident happen with us. We were camping in Lancaster County, my wife and my children and I, and a little pop-up about 4 or 5 years ago now. And we were in this pop-up. Everything was quiet. We were really the only ones in the campground because it was late in the season, and we actually homeschooled my children. And all of a sudden, the entire camper flipped up on one side about 2 feet in the air and then slammed back down. We came running out of the camper. The whole outside of the camper smelled like sulfur. And at that point, everybody announced they had to go to the bathroom, of course. So we all made like a group run to the bathroom in the dark. And when we approached the camp director the next morning and said, we've had an incident happen, she was very, very sure of herself, saying that it was most likely a bear incident. Bears have a tendency to play with the campers and such. And I looked at her and I said, yeah, but black bears can't rotate their wrists. They can't pick anything up. And she just kind of looked at me and shrugged her shoulders. She goes, it was probably a bear or maybe someone playing a prank that you know. Well, my daughter went online and looked in the on Bigfoot areas, and come to find out Lancaster County is one of the hottest spots in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So I believe we had our second encounter, and then we had a third encounter.
Okay.
Not too long after that, with my wife and kids again.
What was that one like?
We were out in a park during school hours. Everybody was in school except my kids, of course, are homeschooled. So we were in a park having a picnic, and we decided to go hiking along a power lines access area. And while I was on the power lines access area, nature called. I kind of parted away from everyone, out of sight, and went to take care of nature. And all of a sudden, the smell came back. Whooping noises began, and then the bushes down below me exploded in front of me, shaking back and forth violently. My wife yelled, my kids got scared, and we started backing up the hill. We were backing up the hill. We noticed that it was following us up the hill in the bushes.
Right. No, I'm not trying to make fun of it, Andre, but so you're peeing, relieving yourself, suddenly the bush in front of you starts. Do you think you were peeing on a Bigfoot?
No, well, I think, in my opinion, I think that in nature, when you have a male will make a scent in an area to signify that that's its destined area. And
right, it's territorial markings, sure.
And I went on re-patronizing the territory. And I think it caught wind of that and became a little enraged.
And it wanted to let you know, go home, this is my area, stop peeing on my bushes.
Exactly. Okay. And I was more than welcome to accommodate, to be honest with you. I had no intention of staying any longer than I wanted to.
All right, let's do this. We need to take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll continue finding about a family's very strange and terrifying encounter with Bigfoot in the northeastern United States. Our guest this evening is Andre Verge. We'll continue with more of the best in paranormal talk radio right after this.
Beyond the darkness.
This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, Tim Dennis. Andre Verge is our guest for the remainder of the show as we talk about his encounter, and it sounds like many encounters, with a Bigfoot. His book, Nightmare in the Woods, One Family's Strange and Terrifying Encounter with Bigfoot in the Northeastern United States. Remember, if you want to order that book, folks, do me a big favor. Go to podcast1.com. Click on the Killer Deals link. When you get in there, find the Beyond the Darkness banner. Click on that. You'll see all of our advertisers, including Amazon. Click on the Amazon button that works in your area, whether it be Canada, the UK, or United States. Click on that link, go in, type in the book title, Nightmare in the Woods, One Family's Strange and Terrifying Encounter with Bigfoot. And when you find that link and you purchase through that link, just a small portion of every sale goes back to help support this show. It doesn't take anything away from the author or from you at all. As a matter of fact, if the book is $20 on Amazon and you buy it through our link, it's still $20. Just a very small percentage goes to keeping the show alive. It's part of our affiliate program and deal with Amazon.com. So a little bit goes a long way in keeping the show as commercial free as we possibly can and more targeted for you. So please go check that out again. Go to the Killer Deals section at podcast1.com. Click on the Killer Deals section, go down to the Beyond the Darkness banner, click that, then click on the Amazon one. And it's good for whatever you want to order, not just the books. If you order anything from Amazon.com and you run it through that link, that will help out our show considerably. And I know many of you have asked, what can we do to help maintain the show? That's one way you can do it. You can continue to maintain it by purchasing all of your orders through our link over at podcast1.com on the Killer Links section. We're back. Andre Verge, our guest this evening. Nightmare in the Woods is his book, and we were talking about some of the experiences that he had. Now, I know we've jumped forward in time a little bit, and we've heard a few of your other experiences with this creature. Let's go back though to the summer of 1976. From start to finish, how long did this encounter take?
The entire encounter took roughly between 3.5 to 4 weeks.
And it started slow. You'd smell it. You could hear this huffing or breathing. Would you hear the quintessential whoops and growls from the woods, or was it keeping more low-key?
It was very low-keyed. It was really just watching us all the time, and we definitely knew it was there.
Now, were you leaving food out by any chance, Andre? Were you or your family leaving food out, maybe either for the dog or for this creature that might have made it so aggressive?
No, not at all. The only food that was really outside was our garden.
Okay.
And we did notice that it was going through the garden.
Was it taking any particular part of the garden over the other?
Honestly, I don't remember. I was so young.
Sure.
I knew that my parents were infuriated because they would have stepped on their tomato plants a few times.
Right.
and they weren't too keen on that. They originally blamed us, my brother and I. But after seeing footprints in the garden and the visits we started encountering, everything changed.
Was this thing becoming more aggressive as maybe the garden was dwindling? Do you have any idea or perspective on that?
I think it started becoming more aggressive when we started entering its domain, because we literally found where it was sleeping in the woods.
What the hell is wrong with you and your family, Andre?
Oh,
I don't think I'd go out into the woods stalking the thing that's stalking me. You've got some cojones on you, my friend. How did you guys decide to go start looking for it?
Well, we actually weren't looking for it. What we decided to do, because back in the 70s, it seemed like everybody would take long walks on the roads and in the woods and things like that with a family. Mm-hmm. And that was something that we looked forward to on a daily basis. So after dinner, going for a long walk together. And one of the places we used to walk was in the woods along what was called the Power Lines Access Road. And when we were walking, you might say, my father decided at one point, we can't let this thing continue to keep us in fear. We have to expand and just face it face to face and just move on with our lives. You know, we're not going to be afraid the rest of our lives. So we started walking on the Power Lines Access Road, and it ended at a bungalow community that had burned out years ago back in the 60s. and it was in the middle of the woods. So we walked in, and we had gone there many times riding motorcycles and things. It was an adventure. And we discovered that in one of the basements of one of these old burned-out houses was a nest. It reeked. It was the most putrid smell I've ever smelled in my life because it was super concentrated. And when we looked in the darkness, there it was in front of us. There was an 8-foot by 4-foot nest, about a foot deep of grass. And that's when we knew we had stumbled onto where it was living. And I'll be honest with you, we got the hell out of there really fast. There was no reason to stay there any longer than we had to.
Right. Now, did you, when your family finds this, I mean, were you all out on an excursion together when you came across this?
Yeah, the four of us, my parents and my brother and I. And, I mean, of course, my father was wearing a sidearm. So the minute he saw that and I saw it, we kind of backed away from the building and we just went into high alert mode. We were scanning the bushes, the trees, anything that had movement. And what we did discover is there was no wildlife out at all anymore. The deer had gone, there was no birds, everything was just dead silent. That's when we knew that there was something very close by. So we double-timed it back to our home, and it was the longest mile walk I've ever taken in my life.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, now you're looking over your shoulder and worrying if you've irritated this. But now you've gone into its den, and it's got your scent. It knows that you've been poking around in its property, if you will.
Yes. It was pissed at that point.
Yikes. Okay. So once you've
really
done that, what, now prior to that, you were just getting the smells, the huffing sounds, the kind of low growls, and you said things were being thrown.
Yes.
Rocks, was that what it was? And if so, how big were the rocks?
Well, the first rock that got thrown was my mother and I were in the garden. She was actually tending to her garden, and my father and my older brother had gone off to work because we had a landscaping business. And so I was protecting my mother in the garden with a pop gun with dirt stuck in the end because it would shoot dirt out. And I figured, well, as an 8-year-old, at least I'll blind it if it comes out at us.
That's right.
So I'm sitting there in the garden with my mother, and all of a sudden a rock about 5 inches long lands in the garden about 6 feet from me. And I just stared at the rock. I mentioned to my mom, and she looked at me, and she goes, I didn't see anything. And like 10 seconds later, another one lands almost right on top of the first one. And my mother's staring at the rock that just landed, so now she's aware that it's coming in. So she totally disregards it and says, let's just keep working, we'll pick up the vegetables, and we'll go down to the house. And no sooner she said that, one more comes flying over us with about a foot long. And that's when we realized it's time to leave.
It was just playing Bigfoot bocce. There's no reason to get upset, Andre.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was definitely not in the mood to play Bigfoot bocce.
Yeah.
But I remember as we're backing out of the garden, the trees in front of us, there was a thick growth of bushes and stuff, and they just started whipping back and forth. And the first thing that came to my mind is, oh, my God, it's my mother. What about if this thing's a male? So I was scared to death. I had to get her to the house, and I emptied my my firearm of air into the bushes, and you could hear the dirt flying through the bushes, and I think it would probably laugh at that point. But no, we made it down to the house, and that was the turning point because now it was affecting my parents more so than just us.
Right, and boy, I didn't even think of that. You're right. If you're, your mom's a woman. If this was a male Bigfoot, was it posturing? Was there a physical threat of this creature? Maybe in an amorous way, looking for your mother.
Exactly. And,
wow.
I've read books. And ever since this incident happened, I tried to put it out of my mind, but of course I couldn't. So I would read books. I'd watch stories in search of all of that. I don't know how many times I watched The Legend of Boggy Creek. And I kept thinking of all these occurrences, everybody says, oh, it's not dangerous. This is a wild animal. This is a wild creature.
Right.
If you corner it, what's it going to do? And on top of that, now it has a possibility of having logic, and it can think. That's a very dangerous animal in the woods.
Yeah, especially when most humans don't even have that ability.
Exactly. So now, that clicked as I was 8 years old, and I was thinking then, this is a scary situation because my father had told me never corner an animal, especially a wild animal, because it will attack you. And here we are dealing with something that we don't know if it's half human. So it was a very, very scary time in my life. One that I actually tried to block out for many years. And it wasn't until I finally came down and wrote the book that I was able to get a lot of this out of my system.
Now, was it your brother, did you say?
Yes, it was my brother and I that were there.
How old is your brother?
He's 6 years older than I am.
All right, so he has a very good, vivid memory of this, I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And we had a family friend that was also helping us out for a little bit, too, with it.
What did he say? And when you're talking to him about this and you guys reflect back on these stories, he was slightly older, so he was about, 13, 14 years old.
Yep.
He's got a different perspective on this. Did he recall it differently than you did, or was it eerie how spot on you guys were sharing the same stories?
Oh, we were spot on. There were certain things that my family never knew that happened to me solely that I didn't want to bring out because for fear of them being terrified over it, because I was. And it's for lack of a better word, a hell of a burden to carry when you're 8 years old.
Well, can you give us a little bit of that? What was going on that you were holding in from these experiences that you weren't sharing with anyone?
Well, one incident that happened is we had a Cape Cod home, and the bathroom was downstairs. And during the summertime, the windows were open and such, and being that there was no houses behind us, the curtains were never closed behind in the back of our house. Mm-hmm. And I had the misfortune of having to deal with nature at an early morning run downstairs, and it was like 3 a.m. And I walked downstairs, flipped the light on in the bathroom, and 5 feet away from me, separated only by a screen, is exactly what I was running from. And it just stared through the screen at me. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. I literally just sat there and froze, and eventually slowly put my hand up and turned the light out, and then it just kind of stepped away.
Were you smelling it through the screen as well?
No, actually, I didn't smell it through the screen because it was kind of windy that night, so I'm thinking the wind was blowing it in the wrong direction, so I really didn't get much of a scent.
Right, so there was no precursor to you going in the bathroom. And of course, it's a bathroom. If you walk in and there's a funky smell, that could have been anything at that point.
Yep, no, there was no precursor whatsoever.
Now, when you saw this, and is it standing, are you seeing part of it? Are you seeing head and shoulders? What exactly is looking through the window at you?
Well, the head was at the very top of the window, and it was looking down at me, so I was seeing roughly about from the head down to just below the breast. And it was full size. It was just staring at me.
Well, describe what it looks like. Yeah, what did the face look like?
The face, it was covered in a reddish brown hair. The face was reminiscent, almost like an orangutan, but also with human features. And everything was overdone. It was oversized. The nose seemed to be like 2 to 3 inches across, and everything just looked very leathery, as it had a leathery appearance to it. And the eyes were jet black. It was just staring down at me, and all I saw was eye shine at first, and that's when I froze.
Now, what color is the eye shine from these creatures?
Well, my mother, when she first saw it, it had a yellowish tint to it. And that's what really drew her attention to the top of the hill behind our house. That night, when I was looking at it, it was coal black. So I'm guessing maybe the shine from the headlights, it reflected in the eyes and had like a yellowish appearance. But what I saw was jet black, and it didn't make a sound. Very similar, almost like to a bear running in the woods. You really don't hear it.
Right. So when you see this and you're looking at it, it doesn't make a sound to you. Does it bare its teeth? Does it have any movement of the face, eyebrow wiggles, anything? Or was it just almost like a mannequin face staring in the window? Yeah,
very stoic. Very stoic. I remember the only thing that I saw was the nose move from breathing. That was it.
Did you speak? Did you say, go away? Did you try to dissuade it from being there, anything like that? Or was it all silent?
I was pretty much just trying not to pee myself. I really didn't say a whole lot to it. Because now it had, I looked at it like this. I had entered its domain, and now it was letting me know that it could enter mine. And the thing that scared me the most was we had no precursor to it being there. So all of a sudden it sent a shockwave. This thing could come right toward me. I'd never know it was there, and it would be over with.
Yeah, I could see how that could be a little disarming, especially at the age of 8, very small, dealing with this. Now, looking back at it and knowing the height of the window and the perspective you were looking at it from, what would you judge this creature's height to be?
Well, it would have been standing partially on our deck, or at least 1 foot would have been. The other foot most likely was on the ground. I'd say it was probably at least 7 to 7.5 feet tall.
Now, could you hear movement? Was there anything else out there maybe? You know, you said you thought it was an adult and a juvenile.
No, that was the only thing. It stared at me, I'm going to say, for probably a good 8 to 10 seconds without any movement at all. And I was a statue.
You turned off the light and it just kind of fades back out of view?
Yeah, when I first turned on the light, it had a totally lit appearance right in front of me.
Oof.
And I'm just sitting there staring up at this thing, and I'm roughly between 5 and 6 feet away from it.
Now, please, I don't mean this to sound crude, Andre, but you keep saying you're sitting there. Were you sitting on the toilet when?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, actually, I was. When I say sitting, I was just standing.
Okay, all right. I just want a clarification because I'm like, boy, if that's under, you walk into the bathroom, you sit down, flip on the light, and there's something staring at you. But so you never got to the relieving part of the evening.
No, not at all. And that's another thing that came through my mind afterwards. If I had to do that portion where I had to sit down to relieve myself, I would have been less than a foot away. And that thought has haunted me since I was a kid. It's because of that thought that when I go for any walks in the forest now up in Pennsylvania, I carry a sidearm.
Now,
because I'm just too afraid at this point.
But you still go out.
I still go out. For the longest time, my wife and my kids didn't understand why I didn't like to walk in the woods. And it wasn't until this incident that happened with them in the park that all of a sudden they started realizing, hey, there's more to Dad than what he's talking about here.
So you had never opened up to your wife prior to that to let her know about these experiences as a child?
Oh, no, never. Never, because I was afraid of ridicule. Even though she's my wife, I was so deathly afraid that she would laugh at me or poke fun at me, to say the least. So I really just clammed up and just internalized everything.
All right, now you've seen it. It's seen you in one of your most vulnerable moments.
Yes.
That's terrifying in itself. What do? You turn off the lights? Do you run to Mom and Dad's room? Do you just crawl back underneath your covers? What's the next step for Andre?
Well, that's the crazy part. It almost affected me to the core, so all I could do was shut the light off. There was no way I was going anywhere near the window to relieve myself. And I calmly and quietly walked back up the stairs and sat on the edge of my bed till morning. I was afraid to say anything to my folks because I didn't know what they might do. I was deathly afraid of losing my parents, like if they became enraged and said they were just going to get this and end it and go in the woods, because then I figured I'd never see them again.
Understandable. And again, this is the rationale of an 8-year-old boy, and that totally makes sense to me. Totally. Yeah. And again, as a father myself, if something was out stalking my children and was outside the window, now they know me well enough, there's no way I'd run outside, but I'd certainly miss the old one that I sent out to go look into it.
Yep. Exactly. No, I know just what you're talking about.
Right. All right. But, no. So once you've seen this creature, it's seen you, you've seen it. When do you finally tell your family about that experience, or was that one that you've always kept to yourself until the book?
I kept that to myself until the book. Actually, I blocked it out. It rattled me so much that I forcibly put it out of my mind. And as I was starting to write the book, I mean, it was a floodgate of emotion and memories that came flooding back. As I was writing the book, I literally had to stop a few times because I couldn't continue. And there was a few times I was just not going to finish. I said to myself, I can't put myself through this again.
Now, in some of these instances, people feel that they've had telepathic communication with these creatures.
Yes.
Did you or your family ever feel like you breached that line of communication at all?
I don't know. I will tell you this. The last incident I had with one of these was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago?
Yeah, I'm definitely afraid of this stuff.
Andre, it's time to move. Move somewhere safe, like into New York City.
Oh, yeah, well, that's the crazy part. I just moved to Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And because I have 43 acres on a lake. And I figured I'm just going to relax, enjoy life. 2 weeks ago, my dog started barking. I have 2 dogs now. They started barking in the home, and all of a sudden, I noticed that they weren't running toward the windows or the doors like they usually do. They were backing up into the house, and they were going under furniture and staying close to us. So I figured there's somebody crazy outside. So I went. I have a .357 revolver, and I put it in my back, and I walked over in the doorway and opened it up. And as soon as I opened the doorway, I smelled that sulfur smell. So I just slammed the door. The dogs are not going out tonight. We'll clean up whatever they make on the floor at this point. The next morning when I went outside, we have small pine trees close to the house, and one of them was bent down over the driveway.
Yikes. So, now, are you familiar with Eric Altman from the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society out there?
Actually, I'm not.
I'll have to connect you with Eric. He leads quite a few investigations, and this might be something that he can help you with, or at least, get you connected to try to get some answers. But, wow. So in your lifetime, from age 8 until today, how many full-on encounters do you believe you've had with Bigfoot creatures?
11 or 12.
How many actual sightings?
Actual sightings? Well, that varies. I mean, actual physical, right looking at it, 1. I was a foot away from this one when I was a kid, and it was breathing behind me through a hedge. And that's when my father actually saved me from that, because we were sitting on the deck and watching a meteor shower, and he grabbed me by the ankles and pulled me back because it was right behind me in the hedge.
Now, could your father see it?
I don't know.
Or was he just hearing the...
We could hear the breathing. I mean, it was a heavy, heavy breathing sound. I would equate it almost like you'll hear like bears when they huff.
Right.
It was a lot like that, except it was just long, drawn-out huffing back and forth, and then the smell came back. And what really saved us then is our little dog started barking, and it kind of drove it away.
It's funny, isn't it, that maybe a 7 to 9 foot tall, hairy bipedal creature is afraid of a pug?
Oh yeah.
Because pretty much he could soccer ball that puppy across the yard pretty easily, I'm guessing.
Oh, very easily. Very easily.
All right, that's freaky to me. So you're sitting there with your back to this. Were you aware of it? You said your dad grabbed your ankles and pulled you towards him to get you further away. Were you aware of what was going on behind you, or were you too busy watching the meteor shower to really have realized what's going on?
Well, we were all kind of looking up, and then it was dead silent, and all of a sudden we started hearing the breathing. And that's when we realized it was only about a foot to a foot and a half behind me.
How does that feel for you personally? I mean, how do you react now, even upon reflection?
That is a multitude of nightmares over 42 years.
I can only guess. And people wonder why I'm not a fan of the out of doors. Although, this summer, Andre, I've said that I want to go out and I want to have some adventures, and I'd like one of them to be a Bigfoot expedition. I saw Bigfoot when I was about 11 years old myself in Foley, Alabama. I've always wanted to. But mine was not frightening in the sense of it was nothing aggressive. And I never felt fearful of it that way. I just was freaked out that there was a giant hairy Chewbacca-looking thing looking over the top of the bushes at us. So, and it was far enough away that, there was that safe boundary between my cousin and I. So that never really impacted me. But I've always wanted to kind of investigate and put myself out into a location that's, known to have quite a few Sasquatch. Now, for people like that you hear, and they say they would like to go out and have an encounter, somebody who's had encounters and they don't seem always to be so great, what would you say to the enthusiast like myself that would like to go out and put themselves in that position?
Dave, I'm asked this quite a bit, and my answer stays the same all the time. I tell people, try to resist the temptation. If you saw a tiger walking through the woods, you wouldn't want to go up and pet it. Okay? These are very territorial and can be quite fearsome creatures if they want to be, because we really don't know everything about them.
Well, and I got to be honest, if the tiger's playing with a giant ball of yarn, I might want to go play with it. I'm not kidding. Who's your big kitty? Who's your big kitty? But
oh
no,
my God.
you're right. Bigfoot would be
asked,
something different, I think, altogether.
Yeah, I've been asked to go out on Bigfoot expeditions in the past, and I have not gone on a single one. I can't.
Now, you think you've got them on your property, though, where you're at now? Or at least one was passing through.
Yeah, I honestly believe that these things are very transient. They don't stake a claim and stay. They're constantly moving. I've done some research on my own research from everything that's happened to me. And 90% of the time, anytime that there is an encounter that I have, it's close to power lines. And when you look at where the power lines are located, that's a natural highway that goes across the entire country.
Well, why do you think that they would follow power lines? I mean, that would be close to humanity. I would think they would try to avoid that at all costs.
A lot of power lines are really situated in the woods because nobody wants to live near them.
Right.
So there's a lot of woods around the power lines. Power lines also give the opportunity for game. A lot of deer will eat on the grass and everything underneath the power lines, and there's a lot of game. I'm finding that your hottest spots are between power lines and bodies of water.
Would you find any partial remains of animals that look like it had come into an encounter with this Bigfoot creature when you were growing up?
No, we didn't see anything. Like I said, we really tried to stay indoors as much as possible. We would see and hear things around the house, and the smells, of course. But as far as finding any remains, nothing. But I did notice that when all of this began, all wildlife in the area left.
Now, you said once you'd gone in there and kind of disturbed its nesting area, things really amped up. We heard about this appearing at the window and letting you know it was there. What were some of the other freakier aspects of the encounters that happened once you and your family stumbled on its nest?
We started smelling it a lot more around the house. Our dog would start going crazy much more often, and it would make itself known to us, whether it be a rock hitting the side of the house, or we go out in the daytime sometimes, and you can see more tracks all around the house.
But you never called law enforcement again? Nobody ever made that call to have them come reinvestigate?
No, my father actually became pissed.
Okay.
We are old farmers from northern Vermont, and in that section of the country, there wasn't a lot of law enforcement, so you had to handle everything on your own. It was almost like pretty much being in a survival mode. So if you had a problem, if you had something that was coming around, you'd shoot it, and it was over with. My father went into that mode eventually, and he didn't want to because, we're in a very populated state.
Right.
So at that point, shotguns were put near the doors. My dad's pistol was always at the ready. Whenever we went outside, he had his pistol with him.
And did your family ever have any physical encounters where they saw the creature, aside from the one time at the window where you did? Did anybody else have an encounter like that?
Mostly my mother. She saw it running on the side of our house one day. There used to be a small field next to the house, and she saw it running from the road. There was a woods edge near the road. From there across the field back into the woods. And at that point, that's when she became really unnerved. And then, of course, with the rock incident, that finished any more going in the garden. Because we lived on our back deck and in our yard during the summer.
Right.
And after that, we were inside. So it really changed our lives. And it's affected me all the way to today.
What were the final incidents that happened during this entire, 3.5, 4 week stint? What was it, and how did you know it was eventually gone?
Well, we kept watching the news. We kept reading the paper to see if anything else was coming up, and we pretty much went into lockdown mode. Our home became a prison, and we were always on the defense because we didn't know at what time a window was going to smash in and something was just going to grab somebody, or worse than that, kick a door in and just walk right in.
Right.
So we were always on alert status. And then one day we saw in the paper that somebody had a sighting of a bear walking on two legs up in Sussex County, New Jersey. And then from there, it went a little further, and there was a farm where a farmer had witnessed what looked like a large bear walking on two legs go into a rabbit hutch and rip up its rabbits. And it was pulling the heads off of his rabbits. And that's when I determined at that point, this thing is a meat eater. So were we lucky to get out alive? I don't know. But either way, it definitely was no longer a vegetarian. And then we continued to see reports of sightings of people saying that they had seen something up in High Point and then eventually up toward Port Jervis. So we knew it was moving away from us. And then we started seeing the wildlife come back around the area. So we knew at that point it was done.
How hard is it going forward after that to go out on your motorcycles or go for a walk in the woods and still not be terrified that this thing is out there?
Well, I can tell you now when I walk in the woods, I carry a revolver.
Right. I'm talking about as a kid. This thing ended when you were still 8 years old and it was over. But did your family... did they ever recover?
To carry a firearm. No, he continued to carry a firearm until he passed away.
Were you ever allowed to go out into the woods on your own again?
We were allowed to, but we never did. We pretty much abandoned. Sure. Yeah, we abandoned all travel in the woods behind our house at that point. It became too frightening. Even to today, when I'm driving on the road that goes up through the mountain behind our house, my windows have to be up. I'm on high alert even now.
You said once you wrote this book, you started hearing from people in that area that had similar encounters. Tell me a little bit about that. You know, what are some of the encounters that they had, and were they neighbors of yours at the time? Or are they people that live there now? What are you finding most?
Actually, from different towns close by. My wife's best friend contacted me, and she was crying, and she goes, I cannot believe this happened to you. And so I started talking to her, and she related her incidents, and it's like, my God. And then I come to realize that where she saw this creature was on the other side of our property going down into the next town. So other people had witnessed it.
What was her experience like?
She was outside playing at her cousin's house. She was a small girl, actually same age as I was, and she saw this big hairy man walking in the woods and stop and start walking toward her. And she ran inside and told her family, and they all laughed at her and said, "Oh yeah, it's the boogeyman." And after that, she was reluctant to go anywhere near the woods for years.
Understandably.
Yeah, it's people want to put rationale to this to find out what it is.
Right.
This thing has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's been documented with Native Americans and other continents around the world. If it's been here that long, let it go. No reason to take it off any more than we probably already have.
But now you've had experiences with your family as an adult. Were there any times between when you were 8 years old to when your family was in that camper that was getting rocked? Was there ever any other experiences you had along the way that you felt you might have encountered this creature again, or another one?
Just that one a few years ago when I was with my family in the picnic. We were at the park.
How does your family feel about it now that you've come forward with the stories? I mean, you know, they had that experience in the camper as well, and you know, now there's something weird outside your house and the dog's freaking out and that smell is back. Are they concerned and worried?
Well, now they're more concerned about it. When I first started writing the book, I put on a copy of The Legend of Boggy Creek again. And it was very difficult to watch when my 12-year-old daughter started laughing and saying, "Look, Dad, you can see the zipper on the arm. Is that what you're afraid of?" And it's like, oh my God. I felt like I was 2 inches high. So I pretty much tried to bury it again until that happened in the camper. And now my family, when we go out in the woods, they all watch. My wife sometimes, she herself takes a firearm. And we all watch while we're walking because you don't know what you're going to see. Regardless of bears and now cougars in Pennsylvania, this is something it's unnerving. It's something you really don't know what the parameters are.
Well, I am thankful that you came forward to share this story with us and do this. You said you've had years of nightmares because of this.
Yeah.
When you have these nightmares, are the encounters in the nightmares, is there anything strange or profound about them? And I only ask that because I've had some people who said that after they've had encounters, they've had Bigfoot in their dreams, and it doesn't feel like a dream. It feels more like an astral meeting or a connection with these creatures.
Well, I kind of do believe that my ancestral heritage might have something to do with it. Sometimes I do feel like I have a little bit of a connection, and that's why they don't want to seem to leave me alone. Even though I want them to, I really don't want anything to do with this. It was very difficult for me to go back into this after so many years. But the dreams I have now, even to today, it's kind of shocking because I find my family are in the woods and they're being stalked by this as if they're prey, and I have to prevent that from happening. That's why I pretty much keep recurring dreams constantly.
Right.
So I have to either stop this thing from attacking my family or put myself in harm's way so it'll attack me and keep them alive. So, not a nice place to be.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's horrific. Andre, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and with our listeners. I know they're fascinated by this. The book is out and available. It's been available for the last 3 weeks, you said, correct?
Yes.
Nightmare in the Woods, one family's strange and terrifying encounter with Bigfoot in the northeastern United States. We'll have a link up to that on our podcast, so you can click that link and find the book. But like I said, if you're going to buy it, do us a favor. Go through the Killer Deals link on podcast1.com and order it through the Darkness Radio Beyond the Darkness banner. You'll see the Beyond the Darkness banner with our little ghost. Click that. It'll take you in. And then click on the Amazon tab that works for you. Place your order and help support our guest, Andre Verge. You can also help support Darkness Radio by making all of your purchases on Amazon, whether it's books, clothes, food, furniture, whatever, all through that link. That's the way that you can reach out and make sure to support Darkness Radio's Beyond the Darkness here on the Jericho Network, part of Podcast One. Tomorrow, we're back with Strange Encounters, Dogman, and more. Your buddy Dark Waters is finally making his way to Beyond the Darkness. That's here on the best in paranormal talk radio. For Tim Dennis, I'm Dave Schrader. Special thanks to Andre Verge, our guest this evening. You've been listening to Beyond the Darkness.
Stay tuned for 60-second AP News headlines.
Date. I'm Carlotta Bradley. President Donald Trump is denouncing recent threats against Jewish community centers. He says the recent attack on Jewish community centers shows more must be done to fight anti-Semitism.
The anti-Semitic threats targeting our Jewish community and community centers are horrible and are painful and a very sad reminder of the work that still must be done to root out hate and prejudice and evil.
Dina Marks of the Southwest region of the Anti-Defamation League was on KTRK saying an element of conspiracy in the bomb threats against many of the country's Jewish community centers.
Somebody, it seems like, has put together some sort of concerted effort.
Trump made his comments at the newly opened National Museum of African American History and Culture this morning. AP Update, I'm Carlotta Bradley.